Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is The World This Week. With us is Christopher Dickey of the Daily Beast and Elisabeth Moutet of the Sunday Telegraph, Ulrike Koltermann, Paris journalist, former bureau chief for the German news agency DPA, and Pierre Aski of French digital newspaper Rue 89, 89th Street. We're talking before the break about the EU summit, the changing of the guard, how things may or may not change in over the next 5 years. That EU summit, by the way, kicking off in the Belgian city of Ypres, martyred by some of the bloodiest battles of the First World War, including the horrific use of nerve gas in the trenches. Yes, it was 100 years ago this Saturday that Austria's Archduke Franz Ferdinand shrugged off warnings over his safety and went for a visit to restive Sarajevo. A Serb nationalist shooting both him and his wife, Sophie. The rest, as they say, is history. Before we draw conclusions, Christopher Dickey, I've been reading this week's Max Hastings account of what happened in 1914. It's an incredible comedy of errors that led to the shooting of the Archduke, and warnings unheeded, and you wonder how it could all be possible.
Well, yes, except that, if you look at the history of almost any war, it's usually based on misjudgments, mistakes, delusions, huge delusions. I mean, best movie ever made about World War I probably was Grand Illusion. This whole idea that you could have all these alliances, put them in motion, and somehow that was going to bring stability and peace to the continent, when in fact all you did was trigger a succession of insane events that led to millions and millions and millions of people dying in World War I. If you look at the Battle of Ypres, for instance, the battles, 5 battles at Ypres, where this conference was held, this European conference was held, in each one, hundreds of thousands of people died, and hundreds of thousands went missing in the mud. It was just the worst kind of Dante-esque hellish slaughter you can imagine. And for what? Do any of us remember? Did people know at the time? Why were people fighting World War I? It wasn't like World War II against the Nazis. It was the ambitions of a few leaders and a succession of alliances based on a world order that was dying. And I think that it's a cautionary tale for anyone, but any major war is. They're always based on delusions. They're always based on the logique de guerre, the idea that all kinds of benefits are fabricated and costs are not calculated. That's how you get into a war. Is it just history, or is it still relevant today?
It's complicated to answer simply on that question, because on one side, we're still living in the post-World War I world. Look at what's happening in Iraq. The borders, the shape of that region was a direct result of the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the Sykes-Picot Agreement, that is a secret agreement in 1916 during the war between France and Britain to share the spoils of the Ottoman Empire.
And they say that the Iraq border was drawn by Gertrude Bell and Winston Churchill during a rainy afternoon in 1920.
Yes, and it's just one strike of the pen. So we're still living today with the consequences of what happened 100 years ago. On the other side, I don't think the emotional impact is there. I felt there was much more emotion, for example, at the anniversary of the D-Day in Normandy, that feels closer, feels more pertinent to our lives today than the First World War, although the diplomatic consequences were very important. The other side, I think, is what we should reflect upon. Is not on one side there is the reasons for the start of the war, but it's also the way we ended the war. And I think the First World War was very badly ended, and a lot of what happened in the decades later was a result of badly negotiated peace, including the Second World War and what happened in Germany. Hitler, don't forget that Hitler fought the First World War and was bitter afterwards. What happened in Russia, what happened with the colonies, where everywhere is a badly organized end of the war.
Ulrike Koltermann.
If we talk about ending of the war, then you can compare the situation. Some historians compare the situation with Russia today. The First World War ended, and Germany was not happy with the result, and that was the basis for fascism and everything what came after. And today we could say that Russia is not happy with the result of with the end of the Cold War, and it could be a similar event. I mean, what really triggered the war was not the event today 100 years ago. It could have been any other event. It was like powers were shifting. Germany was heavily investing in the war industry, and many historians say that any other event could have triggered a conflict which was on its way anyway. So it's important to look at this from a distance and think about parallels with today's history. And again, from the German perspective, it's very important that people only now, because of the anniversary, consider the First World War, because in Germany the legacy of the Second World War was much more important. I mean, children at school, they learned so much about the Second World War and nothing about the First World War. And now the perspective is changing because of the anniversary, which is a good thing.
Elisabeth Moutet?
I would argue that the First World War absolutely ushered in the 20th century. And the change to the way society evolved changed much more than the end of at the end of the Second World War, artistically, socially, in terms of empowerment of women, in terms of literature, in terms of politics. I think modern, in terms of the end of the feeling of a sort of superiority of the West. That's the end of the First World War. That's not the end of the Second World War. You see the after effects. But if you read any of the great writers like Proust or Musil or the great man whom I've just discovered, Maddox Ford, about the effect on the 19th century, what we inherited from 19th century society of progress and stability, and you can see that the First World War had a huge effect. I would like, if I may, to quote a family remembrance of the beginning of the First World War, because it so happens that I'm the daughter of somebody who was born in 1901, second marriage, younger daughter, etc. My father recalled once how he was in bed in Lyon, where he lived, and he was 12, and he heard a newsboy crying out the headlines, and it said, "L'Empereur d'Autriche assassiné à Vienne, l'Empereur d'Autriche assassiné à Vienne," which is the newsboy for Austrian Emperor was assassinated in Vienna. So he was already a bit aware, and his father was in politics, and so when somebody came into the room where he was to give him medicine, he said, "Did they kill the Austrian Empire?" "No, you shouldn't worry, it's nothing at all, it's just the Archduke."
All right, and Pierre Aski was mentioning that Sykes-Picot agreement, and a lot of people, including, we must confess, in the France 24 newsroom, did not know of Sykes-Picot until 3 weeks ago. Most of us had forgotten the names of French and British diplomats from 1916. Now, when you look at the map of the redrawing of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, well, it's quite relevant to today's world. That's because of the jihadists of ISIS who have vowed to carve out a caliphate. Is it the end of those borders that came from World War I for that part of the world?
No, it's the beginning of a really long and brutal war. I think that, I do think it's important to understand that this Islamic State of Iraq and al-Sham, state is the most important word to focus on there, because they really are a group that wants to create a caliphate, a state in that area. And if you look at what they're doing, they're trying now to consolidate their gains. I don't think they're going to attack Baghdad in a significant way. I don't think they're going to be trying to roll all over the region. They want to nail down what they've got. The problem is that there's no power that can persuade the Sunni Arabs who have been allied with them now that they should trust the Shia of the Maliki government. The Kurds, meanwhile, are happily setting up their own autonomous region, more and more autonomous, more independent all the time. The Turks now look like they will accept that in Kurdistan, which is very interesting.
There was an important development on that, wasn't there? The Prime Minister of Iraqi Kurdistan on Thursday visiting Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey.
Yeah. So you basically that's Turkey saying we can learn to live with this. Once you've got all that going, can you put it back together again? And the reason I think it'll be a long war is that you can't put it back together again, but you can't accept this as the new status quo. This is not like federalization of Iraq. This is the creation of basically a large new terrorist haven in the middle of the Middle East. And no existing government will accept that, and ultimately neither will Europe or the United States.
Won't accept it, but they have accepted what happened over the border in Syria to a large degree.
Well, no, that's going to change too. I mean, it's a big gamble for ISIS. ISIS has done well in Syria. Now they've done phenomenally well in Iraq. But the more they do well, two things happen. They have to consolidate their power, which means they have to keep those groups that are allied with them happy. That's going to be very hard to do. How do they distribute money? How do they govern? How do they do any of that? They don't know. And secondly, they consolidate the people who are opposed to them. If you're going to make enemies of Iran, the United States, Europe, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Israel, Jordan, well, that's a lot to bite off.
And the local populations, because I don't think the local populations are actually happy to be under the new caliphate of ISIS.
Well, I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know.
The problem is that there are two wars being fought. There are two wars being fought at the same time. On one side, they're fighting against the Sykes-Picot and that kind of drafting of the borders, and on the other, they're fighting the old Sunni-Shiite war. And there's no way you're going to. There we deal with the question of Maliki's government and the failure of this government to accommodate every nationality or every people inside Iraq. And today, that's the dilemma of the US, is that if they're helping Maliki to win against a bloody enemy, they will be siding with the Shia against the Sunni, and that has huge consequences, and that's a really tough question to solve. That's why the US would rather get rid of Maliki.
That brings us to what's happened in Baghdad this week. Both the US and Secretary of State, the UK Foreign Secretary, paying calls, but on the back of John Kerry's plea for a more inclusive government, bringing Sunnis into the fold. The Shiite Prime Minister Maliki, unequivocal.
We will attend the first session of Parliament. However, as all you Iraqi people know, there are dangerous interests behind the calls for a national salvation government, as they call it. This government is simply an attempt to kill our young democracy. Calling to form a national salvation government is a coup against the constitution and the political procedure.
It's shocking. He's playing into ISIS' hands, because unless he accepts the minorities to be better presented in the government, he's only playing into the hands of all the extremists. And I think the key, if you look at it from a larger context, is how to integrate political Islamists in the first place. If you look at all the countries affected by the Arab Spring, everywhere where they fight the Islamists, the chaos is getting bigger and bigger, and the only positive exception is Tunisia. They know how to deal with the political Islamists trying to integrate them, and so far this is the only country where it's more or less working.
And Kurdistan.
Yes.
In the case of Iraq, we do see Shiites who are trying to tone it down. There was a call this Friday by Ali Sistani, the most prominent Shiite cleric in the country. Another powerful one, Muqtada al-Sadr, comes off appearing more moderate than Maliki when you listen to him.
We are calling for a national government with new faces from all spectrums. We must move away from sectarian quotas. And we need Iraq Sunnis and Shiites to denounce terrorist organizations.
I'm confused, Christopher Dickey.
Well, Muqtada Sadr is a nationalist, an Iraqi nationalist, which a lot of the Shia are not. His father was an Iraqi, not Persian, not Iranian. Sistani is Iranian.
And we are calling for a national government.
See? We can't shut him up. And that's why he's saying what he's saying. He wants to look for bringing together some kind of national coalition. Maliki says that's what he wants, but Maliki's main interest is Maliki. I think everybody understands that in Iraq. That's one of the reasons that he's such a disaster politically. And you've got all these fractured elements. I mean, the Basra Shia, a lot of them are not interested in a united Iraq. Why do they need the rest of Iraq? They've got oil, they've got Najaf, they've got Karbala, and they've got the outlet to the sea. They've got a lot going for them. They don't need it. A lot of who has a vision of a united Iraq? Probably Muqtada Sadr more than anybody else. It's one of the ironies of this conflict.
We find ourselves in a situation where the Iranians and the Americans are singing from the same hymn sheet.
Look, let's just be real clear. The Americans ought to stay the hell out of Iraq. If there's one thing that we know about Iraq from a decade of social surveys, is that the unifying factor of the Shia and the Sunni is that they hate the Americans. The ones that we put in power hate us. The ones we took out of power hate us. They all hate us. The question is, why should we go in there, waste more money and more lives to try and save them from themselves? I don't see it.
Except that you said a little while earlier that the creation of this terrorist state in the heart of the Middle East is a danger for the whole world. So
it is a danger for the whole world, but we're not going to solve it. We're not going to solve it by going in by ourselves and making a military expedition there, which is what a lot of the idiots in the American Congress are advocating, because they're not going to go fight. The Americans are going to have real problems with security as a result of what's going on out in that area.
But you say they're going.
I'm sorry?
You said that the West is going to get involved.
The West is going to watch it. It's going to sit back and wait. It's going to see
until there's the first terror attack in the West. Because
it'll sit back and wait for a time to see whether the dissent within the caliphate, within this new region, is such that it will just start to disintegrate of its own weight.
I have an innocent question. Whatever is happening with the Arab League? Are they doing anything?
Who cares? I mean, the Arab League, who's going to speak for the Arab League? First of all, the Saudis have no idea what they want to do. They know they hate Maliki. They don't trust the jihadists. They are at sea, and Kerry goes off to see King Abdullah. He was there yesterday, I guess.
Today.
And what are they going to talk about? Do they have any solutions? No. So the Saudis are not going to lead the Arab League. Al-Sisi is too busy, chasing homosexuals, dissenters, and Muslim
Australian journalists.
And Australian journalists. So he's got his own priorities. There's nobody in the
next
Arab
time
League.
the Arab League tries suddenly to dictate about something, they should be reminded that basically they're completely useless.
Well, I think, haven't we all known that all along?
It's been a long time.
Yeah, I don't think that's a revelation.
And to add a little bit to the confusion, now you have Bashar al-Assad bombing ISIS in Iraqi territory. So you have you would have this informal coalition of Iran, the Baghdad government, the US, and now Bashar al-Assad fighting the same enemy. That's a little bit weird.
It gives a whole new meaning to the expression axis of evil.
Yeah, but then the fighting is spreading all over the region. You have Israel involved again, Lebanon,
the Israelis want to
on their way.
The idea is the enemy
ISIS
of my
is getting
enemy
involved
is
in
my friend,
Lebanon too. Now they're sending suicide patrols.
Before we leave, there were many doubting Thomases 2 weeks ago, including on this very show, when it came to staging the World Cup in a Brazil that was rife with social unrest. Now, all we seem to be talking about is the record number of goals in the group phase, stunning upsets, nail-biting and sometimes shoulder-biting drama. Here in France, there's twice as much tooting of horns, by the way, for Les Bleus, the national team, and for Algeria, whose nationals and descendants are celebrating their first ever qualification to the knockout phase.
We are really very, very happy. It is historic, a great comeback. They are a great African team. There's lots of joy. I hope that this evening will be peaceful and calm in Paris and around the world.
It's great. It means a lot. It's the first time we've got through to the second round. It's great.
Yes, everyone's happy for Algeria. Well, almost everybody.
The unfortunate thing about Algeria's football matches is that, regardless of whether they win or lose, they always result in violence, aggression and abuse. It's very alarming. I can't help but notice that it's the only country in which this problem exists.
Really?
Has she never met the Paris Saint-Germain club?
Oh, she never been to England?
Or English football fans, yes.
Scotland?
There are a lot of people, though, who, Pierre Haski, foreigners in Paris, who were surprised to see all the tooting of the horns for Algeria and how boisterous they are.
Why surprised? I would have been surprised if nothing had happened. And the same happened for every nationality represented in the French population. When same goes with Portuguese, the Spaniards didn't do well, so you didn't hear them very much. And the Algerians obviously not only represent a huge part of the foreign-born or foreign origin population in France, but also they have a strong identity problem with Algeria. They're not proud of their country. They don't feel at home in France. And all of a sudden you have something that gives them this identity, football, and successful football. So that's a lot, and that's very important.
What happens when Algeria plays France?
It's going to be interesting if it happens.
Well, now they're going to play Germany, and something very interesting. Because in '82, what happened is that Germany and Austria decided to play 1-0, which meant at that time that both could go to the next round, and Algeria was eliminated. So they have a very
there were several painful
very old
memories.
stories and very painful memories, and
that we can recall. Speaking of painful memories, here in this country, of course, the coverages we're talking about the greatest World Cup since 1970. Yes. I imagine in your newspaper, the Daily Telegraph and the Sunday Telegraph, it's not being pitched that way exactly.
It's one of those great disasters. I mean, Dave Cameron at Ypres is just an aftershock of basically what happened the week before, which is the ignominious defeat of the English national team. It's a very, very sad thing, and it's to a point where it was they are staying in their group for one more round was conditional with to Italy. Winning their match, and Italy lost. Even though they had been supported by The Sun, who had a cover entirely in Italian, they called themselves Il Sole, and they were pushing the Italian team to win, and it did not help. It was the curse of the Sun, and everybody was sort of shot back into oblivion. Let me tell you, cricket. Now we're just going to talk about the Ashes, and that's the end of it.
Well, even in the United States, there's buzz brewing, much to the distaste of conservative columnist Ann Coulter, who calls soccer fever a sign of a nation's moral decay. No American whose great-grandfather was born here is watching soccer. One can only hope that in addition to learning English, these new Americans will drop their soccer fetish with time. Christopher Dickey.
Well, she's just such a jerk, really. I mean, look, why are we giving this person any credibility at all?
It's clickbait.
She'll say n'importe quoi.
It's clickbait.
But what is interesting about football or soccer is that it's one of the rare occasions where the U.S. can rally around a national team, and the U.S. is qualified for the next round.
Sure, look, Americans like winners. They don't really care what the sport is. If we're winning, that's great. If we're losing, then who cares about soccer? Sort of like the English now. You're switching to cricket, as you said.
That was just mean.
Yeah. Listen, it could be worse. You could be Spain. I mean,
true.
How would you like to be new King Felipe? He gets crowned the same day the team loses at the World Cup.
I think it's like rain at weddings. It's luck for the rest of his reign.
And in France, there's ambivalence when it comes to sports in general. It's not a major feature in newspapers. They have a separate sports daily for the most part, which is L'Équipe. And do you sense people who are conflicted because they don't really like football, but the national team's doing well?
I don't think so. I think people, first of all, they enjoy football. And secondly, they were fearing the worst after the previous World Cup performances of the French team, and suddenly they are delighted to see that the team is doing well, that the spirit is good, that they're going to the next round, and now everybody's convinced that they're going to win the World Cup. So I think it's everywhere the same. When the team wins, everybody is enthusiastic, and when the team loses, people just hate them.
I wish I'd brought the cover of Charlie Hebdo this week. Benzema president, and he will do everything. He will cure world hunger. He will be able to assemble IKEA shelves easily. He will be new king of France. It was hysterical.
Well, it is the psychological effect. It's amazing. I mean, you remember in 1998 when France did win, it gave the whole country an incredible.
Remember Germany in 2006? People were all of a sudden proud to show the national flag. Would never happen before, and now it was really like a therapy.
It's Hollande's only chance of going up in the polls.
Exactly. And hope springs eternal. We'll have to leave it there. Christopher Dickey, Ulrike Koltmann, Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, Pierre Aski, thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.